Welcome to Artistic Adventures. We're going to continue our Snow White doll project today, and we're going to be into part 2 of making the dress. Here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do, because I need these to dry, is to glue some red ribbon down on top of this blue ribbon. And I'm using some E6000 fabric fuse for that because I want to just use a really small amount, and that pointed tip helps me a lot. And I'm doing that on wax paper so that the ribbon won't stick to it and I can pull it up later. So I've already done all of these except for this one so I can show you how to do it. These are going to be for the sleeve and I'm going to set those aside to dry, and we'll actually be using those in the next video because this video got so long that we're going to have another part to this dress video. Okay, so the next part is we're going to pull out all our pieces that we cut out from the last video of the bodice, and we have the front and the back, and we're going to start putting these together. These are the sleeves, and we'll put those on in a few minutes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take the front part, and I want to put this together so that the area around the neckline and the bottom of the bodice are sewn together with the backing so that it makes it nice and smooth. But first I have to put some little small darts in, and I mean really tiny darts. And I'm talking about maybe 1/8 of an inch at the widest on the side, going to a point at about a 1/2 inch in. And it's really easier if you put pins in this, as much as I hate using pins when I sew. Otherwise, you don't want to make them too big. So this is how it turns out, and we're going to have to do that on both pieces, both the lining and the part that will be on the front, so that they fit the doll nicely. So I'm just going to sew those together and take the pins out, and then we'll be able to start piecing the bodice together. So that's the other part of it. Now we're going to put the two right sides together. That would be the sides that are not sewn on. And we're going to sew around the neckline and around the bottom. And this will allow us to turn it and have a nice edge that will be finished instead of a raw seam. And then we'll put the rest of the bodice together. So the first thing I'm doing is sewing along the bottom part that has that little point that comes down, and then I'm going to go ahead and pin this upper part together so that I make sure that I get it in the right places, and then we'll sew the neckline part together. And when you do this, you're going to have to trim it and iron it so that so that when you unfold it, you know that everything is laying in the proper place. So stay tuned for that. I've got my iron heating up on the side. All right, so we've got that done, and now we're going to go around and put little slits into the fabric, so when we turn these curved areas, they'll lay flat, so it'll look like kind of like that. I'm doing the same thing down on the bottom, even though that's not curved, but putting those little slits into the fabric really helps it lay down flat at the seam. So once I get those done, then we can turn it. The sides are still open. I'm trimming off a little bit at the tip there so it won't be so bulky when we turn it. All right, so we're going to turn it because the sides are open, and then we'll be able to iron down the curve of the neckline and the bottom part so that it looks nice and neat. And that's, you can see the neckline there, how that turned out. So that's going to look pretty good. All right, so I'm going to go off camera and do some ironing, and I'll be right back. All right, so I've heated up my little iron. I have this little travel iron that I've had since I was in college. And I want to just make sure that the fit looks good on the doll after I ironed it. And it's looking like it's going to be a good fit. And we'll know more once we get the back part on and we can do any adjustments that we need in the seams. So now with the backs, I'm going to do the same thing Although I started out just doing the bottom part thinking I might do something different with the top, but then after I folded it, I realized that it really does need to be sewn at the top and the bottom for it to fit with the bodice that we've already done. So right now I'm just going across the bottom part and sewing that and do that on both sides. And then I did go off camera and iron it. And after I looked at it, I realized, that's going to have to be done up at the neckline too. Otherwise, it's going to look weird and it's not going to fit with what I did on the bodice on the front. So I went back in and sewed up on the back neckline. I'm leaving the shoulders open because I'm going to actually sew the front and back shoulders together, and that will take care of that seam. So just doing a little bit more ironing there, getting those seams flat. So that's the part that I just sewed with a little thing there, and that's the bottom. So, and then that side over there is where the armhole will be, and then the side seam. So there's that flat area in the back that we'll finish later, and that'll be the part that laps over. We can put some Velcro on. All right, now I'm going to attach the side, the front to the back, and sew it at the shoulder seams. And that'll take care of finishing off that area so that it doesn't look raw. And do that to the other side as well. So now we've got the two shoulder seams sewn together that hooks the front and the back together. At this point, then we're going to be able to put the sleeves in. Now, Snow White has kind of these puffy sleeves, and we're going to do a base sleeve made out of this raw silk that I had from another project, but it's the right color. It's that light blue color. And so right now I'm just going to put in a gathering seam and run that right along the top. And that will allow me to pull it and gather that into a poofy look at the top. And this will be somewhat hidden. This part of the sleeve will be somewhat hidden by the ribbons that I'm going to put on later. But I do want to have sort of a puffy looking sleeve. So once you gather those, then you get the bodice out, and then we'll sew the sleeves to the bodice. And it's easier to do this without sewing the side seam first on these little tiny costumes. So what you want to do is take the middle of the sleeve at the top there and pin it to the shoulder seam, so that the top of the sleeve is right at the shoulder. All right, and so you pin that there. And then what you do is pin the two sides at the very ends, and then you can work your gathers in to the rest of the area so that it all fits. So go to either side and then put your pins in between, and then you'll be able to sew it and it'll be nicely gathered. So I'm sewing right just beneath where that gather seam is so it won't show. And once I take the pins out and trim off all these stray threads that we're getting, then we can show you that it's a nice gathered sleeve on the top there. That'll be the top part of the shoulder. Okay, we're going to do the same thing to the other side with the other sleeve. And then once we have the sleeves in, then we'll be able to match up the side seams and make sure that they match and sew those together. And that will sort of complete the main part of the bodice. We'll still have to do some work on the back. So here I'm sewing in the other sleeve, taking the pins out, and we've got that done. Now the next part is to hem the sleeves. So now we've got our two puffy sleeves. Now we're going to hem the sleeve so that we don't have a raw edge. Although I did put the stop fray on it, so that's nice. It didn't unravel. So I'm just turning up a little bit, like 1/8 of an inch, enough to get it caught under the presser foot. And we're going to put just a small seam there and turn up that hem. And we're going to cover that up slightly by putting some elastic in it. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute. This is the easy way to get it to gather on the bottom. So I've got this really thin, small elastic. And what you want to do is cut it a little bit larger than you want the final opening to be, so I want it to be about like that. So I'm going to cut 2 pieces that size. And then what we'll do is take those small pieces and sew it on the underside of the hem, and we'll pull it as we sew it, and that will allow you to have a gather. And that keeps you from having to put like a loop in the fabric and then run the elastic through it. All right, and this is going to be somewhat covered up by that ribbon that we're going to put over it. So you want to get it started so that you have your presser foot holding it firmly at one end. So get the sewing started and then pull the elastic as you sew it and sew on top of it, and then that gathers it as you sew it. That's sort of an easy way to do a little gathered sleeve, but have it be elastic also. All right, so we've got the elastic in both of our sleeves, and it's gathered at the bottom. And now we can do the side seams. And once I got all this together, I realized that the back part was a little bit longer on the side seam than the front part. As you can see here, it's a little bit longer on the back side. So what I had to do was just go and turn that inside out on the back and take that up a little bit. And that's kind of how I sew. Like I told you, my patterns are a little bit loosey-goosey, and as I put things together, I'll find things like this. But this is easily fixed. We're just going to put a little bit larger seam there across the bottom so that the side seams will match. And after I do that on both sides and trim it, then I can put the sides together and sew the side seam all the way up across the bottom of the sleeve. So I'm going to do that on both sides. And now we've got the finished bodice except for the closure in the back. And I did do a little fitting here just to make sure that I get this right. And what I did is take the opening in the back and sort of fold the ends in and pin it. And then I'll put a little seam across the end of that. And that way the parts that flips over will be a finished edge. And I did that on both sides. And we'll do some Velcro on the back of that in our next video. This video took longer than I had anticipated. I was really hoping that I would get the bodice done here in this video and then we could move on to something else, but it really ended up taking a lot more time and I don't want to make them too long. So we'll complete all this in another video. Lots of time. We got plenty of time. All right, so now I'm going to do a little bit of trim work. And while I'm doing that, I'm sewing. I'm listening to Amy Grant's Christmas album, which I think is the best Christmas album ever. And that way I can have a little something going on while I'm sewing. Because even though I put this on fast forward, for me, this has taken about an hour or so to do. And I need to have a little something to listen to. Now I'm using this gold thread. It's not very strong, so you don't want to pull it too tight, but it does look good when you're sewing on this gold braid. And I did put a little glue on the end of that so it wouldn't unravel. And I'm going to fold that under up at the neckline so that it's a finished edge. So just fold that under. And then I'm going to sew with that thread underneath the gold braid so that it doesn't show very much. And I'm doing this in fast forward. All I'm doing is just catching the blue material and then catching a little bit of the back of the gold braid so that it sits right on top of the neckline. And we're going to take the neckline all the way around and do a little loop down the front because I want to have some more decoration on this bodice with this gold trim. Although the real Snow White costume doesn't really have a lot of decoration, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. And if you've seen some of the cosplay costumes, they can be a little bit more elaborate. So this is going to take some time, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to split this into 2 different videos on this bodice. Now I'm going to stop around the neckline about midway and take a strip of that gold down the front. I'm going to loop that around and come back up the front to continue around the neckline. But for now, I'm just going down the front, and I just wanted to pin it so it doesn't move, and I make sure that I don't get it sort of cattywampus all over the place on this bodice. I want it to be straight. So I'm just going in uh, um, really up through the gold braid and right back down so that it doesn't really show. So up and down, and that holds it pretty tightly. You just don't want to pull that gold thread because the gold thread can break fairly easily. But it does look good. It doesn't show when you're sewing on top of it, of the gold braid like that. All right, so you get down at the bottom, and then we're going to make just a loop down at the bottom and just come right up beside it. That way, when we do some of our more decorative work on the bodice, we've got this middle piece to help guide us and keep it symmetrical on either side. So I'm just pinning that down, going up the front, and then we'll get back into sewing, going in and out. And I'm enjoying the Christmas album. It's really good. And I'm also having a little bit of wine while I do this, so that takes up my time. Makes it a little bit more enjoyable. I don't know if you guys like to have a little glass while you're working, but it's nice. And I don't know if you guys have done any Christmas decorations. We did ours yesterday, although it's 80 degrees here in Florida, so it was a little hot, but it still feels like Christmas. I'm enjoying it. I got all my Christmas shopping done. All right, so we go back up to the top of the neckline, and then we'll just go ahead and continue, put a little 90-degree angle bend in it, and then we'll continue around that neckline all the way to the back part of the bodice, just like we did on the other side. And this will be a good base for some of the more decorative work that we're going to do. So we'll just have the basics here. And I am putting a little bit of E6000 glue on the end of that gold braid because it will unravel if you don't. So make sure you do glue that down with something. And I'm fastening that down over on the end where I've looped it around so that it doesn't show. All right, so we've got that part of the gold trim done, and now we're going to do some trim around the bottom. And this will be basically the last step that we're going to do in this video since it's taking so long and I don't want to take forever to get through this video. I don't want to bore you guys, but this just is tedious and the hand sewing takes a while. So going right underneath where I put that loop on the front that came down, I'm putting this piece of the trim underneath that on the bottom. And it just gives it a nice finished edge. Putting a little glue on that end of that piece. And then we're going to finish up here by folding that over and sewing that end down behind the other piece. And then once we have that done, we'll be finished with this portion of the bodice. But we have lots more to come. This is going to be a fairly involved costume. All right, so there we have the top with the two lines down the front. We've got the sleeves in, we've got the trim around the bottom. We come back in the next video, we're going to have lots more to do. So I'll give you a little bit of a close-up view of how that looks in a picture. But I think it turned out really nice. And this ribbon's going to go on the sleeves, and then we're going to do some more decorative work with that gold braid. So here's where we are at this point. We've got the gold braid down, we've got the sleeves in. We're going to come back in the next video and give you guys some more decorative look to Snow White in her dress. And after we finish that part, then all we've got left are the shoes, and we'll finish up the hairdo, and then Snow White will be complete. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And as always, please subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks, and bye.